Hello, everybody, and welcome to round 3 of the 2022 GP4 Offline Championship. We are here at the Korea International Circuit in Yeongnam for the Korean Grand Prix. Obviously, it's a week later than scheduled due to Yuri's illness, but we are finally back after a bit of a week break. I am JW97, and I'm joined today by reigning world champion Franco Gamba.
Hello, people. Thanks, Joe, for this introduction. And it's actually interesting to be back finally. And weather looks quite tricky, I'd say.
Yes, indeed. You guys would have seen the weather just before we got there. It is going to start off dry, as you saw with the water. The water filter, whatever it's called. I lost the word there. But it is going to rain, so it does appear like we're going to have changeable conditions during this session. Now, we should point out there is one reserve driver in the car today, and that is Robert Ionescu. He is driving the Red Bull today in place of George Roque. So, but Roque will, of course, be back for qualifying, so don't worry about that. But for this practice session, we have Robert Ionescu in the Red Bull. So, anyway, the session is underway, and we might as well talk about the last race in China because, a lot of topics with China 2 weeks ago. It was a bit of a chaotic race, but a race which finally saw Jesus Perinen finally break his duck and finally become a Grand Prix winner.
I mean, finally, because last season he was very close various times to get a win, but somehow never get it. All due to maybe bad luck or bad strategies by his team. Yeah, in probably the most chaotic race we have seen in a while, he managed finally to win a very, very well-deserved win, and of course, both him and Roman are doing pretty fine. So I don't think it will be the last time Renault will win a race.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, we saw that Roman Quagga still got some very good pace, although arguably he potentially cost the team a 1-2 last time out in China, thanks to his silly little incident with, I think it was Kirishima DeRosa, if I'm not mistaken, and it was kind of a case of some accidents that we saw at that particular corner, which Yuri will definitely be taking the microscope with and seeing what the issue with that corner is.
Yeah, I mean, let's say last race is a race that, from a host perspective, is actually to forget, but it has delivered quite a lot of action in the viewer's eyes. It has actually brought a lot of action. But yeah, actually, it would have been probably it could have been probably a Renault 1-2 last race if it wasn't for the madness at the famous corner we know where all the crashes has happened.
And they would have probably been gifted that 1-2 thanks to another team who once again decided to cause chaos at that corner, because once again the Mercedeses once again ran into each other. Will there ever be a day where they don't run into each other, Franco?
Yeah, I mean, Florian has actually uploaded a video of all the compilation of the crashes between, or all the moments of the crashes between Franco and Harmer, and it's so hilarious that as the video was published, another crash has happened. So get ready, Flo, for creating a part 2 of the video, because yeah, there will be a lot of more crashes, I think.
Especially now that Mercedes have definitely got a car that's capable of fighting for the championship once again. Of course, they were in the title fight last season, but at times their 2021 car just was very, very inconsistent. And the fact that they were even in the title fight at all last season was just, in essence, a miracle, really. And the fact that car was able to level yourself in the championship going into that last season was also a miracle. But now they do have a car which is consistently up there, and it's important really that the drivers don't keep running into each other like they did throughout 2019 and 2020.
Absolutely. It's crucial also because it's not like 2 years ago where Red Bull was close, but not as close as it is this season. Actually, this season there is a very close gap between Red Bull and Mercedes, where in 2020 there was more more margin from Mercedes to Red Bull and all the other teams. So they have to capitalize all the possible good results, and with that they can actually be champions again.
Yeah, indeed. The aim, of course, for them is to reclaim the titles that they lost last season from Red Bull. But speaking of Red Bull, it is currently a 1-2. Ian Eskew's just gone into second, 7/10 off of Evan Byrne, who, it's safe to say his season, he obviously left Renault because of all the bad luck he was having at that team. But so far this season, it seems that the bad luck has followed him to Red Bull.
That's actually unbelievable because Melbourne was actually a race where he was going to win, but yeah, we all know what has happened in Tar 1. And last race, it was like another unfortunate situation or circumstances happened to him. Like it was held up in qualifying for like 4 times and was knocked out of Q2. And then in the race didn't went any better because he got a bad strategy after a lap 1 collision with some cars. And yeah, actually to bounce back now because if it's going to become a regular situation for him, it's never going to help him to get finally that deserved championship.
Yeah, indeed, and obviously he arguably he probably should have won the 2011 championship given he got the most wins, but obviously due to mechanical failures, it obviously didn't happen. As we're looking at Ian Eskew who's trying to get by, and I think the Jamie Griffiths says they are now dots on the racetrack, as you can see going through into turn 1. So already the raining conditions that we saw on the weather graphic is starting to take shape, and I think we are going to start to see some slower lap times very, very soon. So it does look like the rain has finally arrived here at the Korea International Circuit. Of course, last year here at this circuit, this was the circuit where Chris Chatfield took his first ever victory in the top class, and it meant that it led to a very good second half of the season for him, which led to him getting third in the Drivers' Championship. But I think it's safe to say, judging from the pace that we've seen from Ferrari this season, it's probably unlikely that they're going to get a victory, going to win here this time around, Franco.
Yeah, indeed. I have the same feeling. Like, Ferrari is a good car for competing, maybe for podiums in a chaotic race like it was last time around in China. But on real pace, maybe P5 for them at the moment. P5 and P6 at the moment on pure pace will be actually a victory because it isn't the same car they had last season where actually Chatfield was a demon in the second part of the season last season, so it will be difficult to replicate that.
Yep, and it's probably going to need a lot of luck if that was the case as well. So obviously, as you talked about with the podium, of course, Jake Galloway getting a podium last time out in China, mainly due to the chaos. But even before the chaos, he was showing some very good pace in that car. As you now ride on board with Laura Chung. Oh, we've got a crash! It's a crash between Griffiths and one of the Haas cars, I think. Who is that? It's one of the Haas cars. I think it's either Kloss or Mocho.
Mocho, because you have the black on board, the black cam.
And it's meant that the car has ended up with front wing damage as well. Same with a McLaren as well, who's got a...
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Alright. Well, Yuri's just said this will not count towards the spare car ban between Mocho... It's actually Mocho, in fact, not Kloss. This will not count towards... Okay, so this does not count as a spare car ban for anybody wondering. This counts as a glitch, as Yuri's just confirmed to his in-audio. Of course, you can't hear Yuri, but of course, me and Franco can, that is for sure. So this does not count as a spare car ban, by the way. This counts more as a glitch. So Mocho and... who was the other one? It was another... Who was it again, Franco? I forgot.
Griffiths.
Chris, that's the one. They've basically got a lifeline with that one, but yeah, that's pretty much that. And of course, that corner, Yuri has said he will be looking under the microscope throughout tomorrow, of course, because it has been a bit of a problematic corner in the past. And who knows, really, given the chaos that we saw in China, hopefully it's not going to be too chaotic tomorrow.
Hopefully so. Last season, actually, we had only one moment where we have seen a lot of chows, and it was even on under rain conditions where the chows is expected to be more. So I hope actually the same type of race can happen tomorrow with only one problem maximum, and yeah, less stressful stuff for Giro in general.
Yep, indeed, as we currently ride on board, speaking of a Haas, with Barcic Kloss, and in that chaotic race in China, it was a very, very good race for Kloss. Despite the fact that he got damage on the first lap of the race, he made an incredible comeback and got, well, ended up getting his best ever finish in the top class, finishing in 4th position. And, well, after what was a disastrous Australian Grand Prix in China, Haas really bounced back and are now up to 5th in the Constructors' Championship.
Haas really looks good this year. I mean, they can get a lot of good results, and China is the example that it was even with a bit of elf of the madness happened in the track, but I don't think that car have a lot of potential, and it can compete regularly for top 10 finishes and for good results like they got in China.
What about a podium, though? That's one thing I think people will be wondering. Could that car potentially get a podium this season with that car?
Well, usually we have seen sometimes us getting in top 5 even during a practice or a qualifying session. Like not the main when it matters. It mattered the more. Like in Q3, but in a Q2 or a Q1 or a Q2, maybe I have seen 1 or 2 times a Haas in top 5. So I don't think that it's possible, but they have to be a lot lucky in general to get that type of result.
Yeah, indeed. You may have noticed as well, as we went around turn 1, there is now spray starting to appear on the racetrack. So at this point, we're probably not going to be seeing any improvements now for the remainder of the session. So the results that you see on the left hand side are probably going to be the results that end up being the case for the remainder of this session, but we'll of course wait and see on that. Of course, we might have a dramatic change in the weather where it gets completely dry all of a sudden. We'll have to wait and see on that. But yeah, so for Haas, a very good weekend at China. So we look at Franco Lopez, who's looking to bounce back after he got took out by Armar Carr in the last race, and oddly enough, right, because of that takeout and Carr finishing second last time out in China, it has meant that Carr now takes the lead in the Drivers' Championship. So a little bit of cheeky tactics from Carr, perhaps, I don't know. Don't want to cause any conspiracy theories, but there we are. I think Armar, from what I gather, was trying to create his own conspiracy theory in the Discord chat, as that is getting very tight between 3 cars there, as that McLaren was coming into the pits there. That got very extremely close for comfort there, but thankfully nothing bad happened there. And that's pretty much that, really. So obviously as well, another driver who got their first points of the season last time out was David Kupark, and he was another driver that also got damage on the first lap. But it's safe to say that for David Kupark, he's not had the start of the season that he was expecting, and I would argue that Gal's had the upper hand on him so far.
Agree. Definitely, let's say, in Australia it was Gal performing very well since a long time, and it was Kupark doing a WWE battle with Kloss. And yeah, last race actually, it was the Holy AlphaTauri finishing the race as Gal's car flipped during lap 1 last time round. General, maybe Kupark has been even a bit helped by the chows with the 12 car finishing and him getting 2 points that are seriously precious for AlphaTauri in general in terms of their battle for the midfield in general. And yeah, I mean, I expect Gal to be more strong than Cupop, to be fair.
Yeah, indeed. We just saw there that Rahul Patel just made a mistake going through into the left-hander. And also, whilst that was happening, we noticed that a couple of cars are now onto the intermediate tyres. He was one of them, along with Jesus Perrin, I think the other driver was. I think, is that McLaren also on the intermediate tyres? That's just got by there on the Alfa Romeo going down the straight. Ionescu's coming in. I'd imagine he's also going to change onto the intermediate tyres. So that's pretty much that. Here is Bence Valdinga, and he was another man who got his first ever championship points last time out at China, finishing in P8 and getting 4 championship points on the board for Alfa Romeo, and safe to say a pretty decent start to life in the top class for Bence Valdinga.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's doing what the car can do, actually. He capitalized pretty well last race, where actually got 4 points and stayed away from all the chaos and the madness happened. And he was nearly going to be overtaken by Cupok at the end, because his tires were probably done. But in Australia as well, he has actually shown a decent pace. We know actually Alfa Romeo is down on their trend in during the preseason. We know this, and yeah, I think Bence is going to perform really fine. Yeah, he has done pretty well last season as well in Formula 2. Maybe it finally gave him the right confidence for his new adventure here in Formula 1.
Indeed, we just saw a McLaren there getting by on the Aston Martin, and on the topic of McLaren, really, I think it's safe to say that they seem to, so far this season, as Sontag has a moment going through into the right-hander there, they seem to be struggling when it comes to the one-lap pace, but in the race, they seem to have pretty good pace, and they were looking good to possibly get a double points finish in China, but obviously De Rosa got took out by, of course, Romain Quagg, and then Willows, of course, retired thanks to a mechanical failure. But yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, really, for McLaren in their first season with BMW, because, as mentioned, they've got good race pace, but in qualifying, they just seem to struggle.
The one thing that I noticed with McLaren is that during qualifying, there's always one car performing well enough and the other performing quite bad. Last 2 times it was Kiro getting knocked out in Q1, and Joe Willows actually doing fine in Q2, or doing the maximum that actually the car can bring during the qualifying. And yeah, during the race they actually do pretty well, it seems, last 2 times. So I think that actually McLaren is not actually slow as people maybe thought, but it's actually it needs a bit of time to adapt on their new engine actually, and design, car design and everything.
Yeah, indeed, and we'll obviously have to wait and see how they do in the qualifying session a little bit later on, whether they've improved or not. Obviously, before the wet conditions came out, Willows is actually in 9th and De Rosa down in 20th. So I think it's safe to say when you look at the pair of them so far, it seems that Willows has adapted to the car more than what De Rosa has, because, as you said, Franco, the last 2 qualifying sessions, De Rosa has been knocked out in Q1. In Australia, he qualified on the back row of the grid, and then in China, he qualified in 20th, really. And obviously, in the race, he showed how quick he can be, but clearly in qualifying, he seems to struggle more than what Willows is.
Yeah, I mean, probably it's the fact that Kiro can't adapt pretty well to the car on the single lap pace, when actually for a driver like Willows, who is very experienced, is more easier. And yeah, I mean, in general, I hope that actually Kiro improve this weakness, and with this McLaren is going to have easier life, because they're already doing, I mean, fine for the car they have. A bit unfortunate, sadly, because they had issues or crashes at the worst moment possible, probably.
Yeah, indeed, and we'll have to wait and see if they can bounce back here at the Korean Grand Prix tomorrow, of course, as currently the team currently lies down in, I think it's 8th place in the Constructors' Championship, if I'm not mistaken, so not exactly where McLaren want to be, as given their race pace, they probably expect to be a little bit more higher in the Constructors' Championship, and then, of course, they'll look to probably try and build on that in 2023, and hopefully do better. And who knows, really? Maybe have a car that can maybe challenge towards the front at some point. But we'll have to wait and see, of course, what happens, really. 2023 is still quite a long way away, as Mocho is currently under pressure from one of the Renaults right now, as they come out of the right-hander there. But the Renault not going to be able to overtake him at this point in time. Of course, Mocho and Griffiths have... Yes. Yes, obviously that corner is also a bit of a problematic corner around this track, as it has had some accidents in the past few seasons, because for whatever reason drivers just can't go side by side through into there unless they're going for around the outside pass before the corner. So it's a little bit of a bizarre corner, that, really, and obviously another corner that Yuri's going to keep under the microscope throughout tomorrow, as once again my dog decides to scratch on the door like it did yesterday during Formula E. Even though the Hoover's not on, so I don't understand why my dog wants to come in here. But anyway, live for you. Probably it is. Oh, in fact, the Hoover is on, it seems. But yeah. Anyway, anyway, what was we going to talk about? We'll move off from McLaren. Aston Martin, of course, got their first points last time out, despite the fact that the car this season is definitely worse than what it was last season. Johannes Martins getting his first ever points last time out at China, but it was on a technicality because his teammate Andre Verderi technically finished in the points, but he got a penalty for a multi-car crash that he caused at the hairpin, and well, it just seems to be the story of Andre Verderi, doesn't it, Franco?
Yeah, in general, it's actually hilarious because every time that Federi has the chance to prove that he's actually a good driver, he messed up and caused some silly errors or some silly crashes where he involved other drivers that actually weren't at fault. So that's pretty much his story.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And, of course, as mentioned, Johannes Martins was able to take advantage of this and take his first ever points in the top class, like Bent Valdinga, which means that both rookies have now scored at least 1 point this season. But it's safe to say that for Aston Martin, they kind of need to hope that those sorts of racings happen a bit more frequently, because, as mentioned, as De Rosa makes a mistake, similar to what Rahul Patel did a little bit earlier on, and nearly runs into a Lamborghini, speaking of which. But as saying, for Aston Martin, they've got to hope they get more luck like that, because their car, safe to say, it's one of the worst on the grid.
I mean, Aston Martin is between the second or third worst car, depends on the track and on the qualifying session evolution. But yeah, in general, Aston Martin has definitely been worse than last season so far, and it isn't expected to be better. So both drivers have to actually pray that a race like China happens again, because this is where they can realistically get points. Even if in Australia Federi did fine, but yeah, they were very, very far in terms of gap in top 10. So yeah, it's going to be a very difficult season for them, I feel.
Yeah, indeed. But I would argue they haven't got the worst car on the grid, because I think that goes to the car that we're currently looking at the moment, which is the Williams. And a lot of people, it's safe to say, obviously in China, of course, once again, despite the chaotic race, they did not score any points. Now, fair enough, Felix Sontag did sustain, I think, some damage during the race, but even so, that car was just way off the pace even before then. And a lot of people are saying, are they now regretting switching to Lamborghini?
I have the feeling that probably they have this type of regret, but we know how it went with McLaren. They took an year or two to get better results in general. In real life, and so far, I think it's a regret because, of course, the car looks the worst on the grid, and only with a miracle they can get points, to be honest. But on the long term, maybe, who knows, in the second part of the season or in 2023 they can be decent. Who knows?
Yeah, indeed, and obviously it's one that they'll probably have to stick out, really, and hope that things get a little bit better, of course. We have noticed as well that some drivers are now onto the wet weather tyres at the moment. Some have opted to go onto the normal wet tyre, whether that be in the soft or the hard variation of the normal wet, we're not sure, but others are still sticking on the intermediate, so that does suggest that maybe the conditions on track have changed a bit more whilst we were talking there, but we obviously mentioned about Williams as a engine supplier, Lamborghini. You might as well mention them now, because we haven't mentioned them, of course. Laura Chong, once again, putting in some very strong performances in that car, and obviously it's safe to say that Lamborghini themselves, like with Ferrari, have definitely gone backwards compared to last season, as, that's going a little bit too close to comfort there. Thankfully, that didn't end in a disaster, but as saying, Lamborghini, obviously Chong putting in a very good performance in her home race, but for Rahul Patel, it's been a very, very disastrous first two races of the season, really, and as a result, he's now currently last in the Drivers' Championship, and yeah, it's safe to say that in these first two races, I think Rahul has definitely been seeing red in his eyes.
I mean, probably the worst start possible actually has happened to Raul so far. And I start to feel that maybe he could have a little bit of regret of not putting Red Bull as number one choice on last season's signups. That could have probably worked for him, because it probably would have been at Red Bull if he chose Red Bull as his number one choice. But yeah, so far for Lamborghini in general, it has been a difficult season. Chang is doing fine, mostly. But yeah, Raul, he caused a lot of crashes so far. He caused a lot of, let's say, even he ruined, of course, Evans' race in Melbourne, where he was about to win easily. And in China, yeah, he caused a crash. I think with the car we are now going to see, it was maybe Griffiths. I don't remember which car he collided with, but yeah, it's not exactly the easiest start for him. But I think that is going to bounce back soon as the season going on.
Indeed, and we'll obviously have to wait and see if it does, of course. But yeah, he definitely needs to put those two races to bed, really, and really focus on the remainder of the season, really. Well, he's remaining 19 races, of course, because he can't really dwell on the past too much. Otherwise, the chances of those things happening again could increase. As we look at Laura Chung on the intermediate tyres, interestingly enough, the Inter's still having a little bit more pace than the wet weather tyres at the moment, although you could argue that's because of the car that Chung's right behind, which is the Williams. But again, we haven't really seen what it's like compared to other drivers who are out there on the wet weather tyres. And just to clarify what you were wondering there earlier, Franco, it was Jamie Griffiths that was the driver that that Rahul Patel collided with in China, so you were correct on that. As we look at Omar Kar, who's also opted to go onto the wet tyres, he's just started a lap, so and he's looking at some very good pace on the tyres. Remember, of course, with these normal wet tyres, there is a soft and hard compound of these, so it could be a case that that Griffiths is on the harder compound of wets, and others are on the softer compound of the wets. So that's obviously something to bear in mind. For anybody wondering the compound we are using here at South Korea, we are using the medium tyre, and that does mean that for the next race, the medium tyre will not be used because, of course, a new rule, if you were watching the discussion stream at the end of last season, a new rule that was brought in from this season is that if a certain tyre compound gets used for back-to-back races, then it will not be used for a third consecutive meeting, and it will instead be another tyre compound instead. So for the last 2 races in China and now here in Korea, it has been the yellow medium tyre. So that will mean that when we go to Baku next week, we're not using the medium tyre. We will instead either use the soft tyre or the hard tyre. So that's kind of that. Of course, the medium tyre will be reinstated again for round 5 of the championship, which will see the top class make their first ever visit to Misano. But for Baku, of course, the medium tyre isn't eligible to be used for Baku. So just to point that one out there, really. So yeah, that's kind of that, really. But it is the medium tyres that we are using this week for the Korean Grand Prix. As we have just over 10 minutes to go in this session, as the conditions look to be getting worse. As you can see, there's now rain on the screen. There wasn't rain that we saw a little bit earlier on, but now there is. So we've nearly just over 10 minutes to go. This is what the leaderboard looks like, and probably is going to remain like this for the remainder of the session, just as Wilson starts a lap. It is Byrne at the top with Carr in second, Lopez in third, with Ionescu, the Red Bull reserve driver, in fourth, with Jake Galloway in fifth, Jesus Perinen, the Grand Prix winner at China last time out, in sixth, with Miklos Gal in seventh, Michael Mocho in eighth, Joseph Wellows is ninth, with Rahul Patel in 10th, Roman Quagg all the way down in 11th, with Barches Kloss in 12th, Laura Chung in 13th, with Amelia Wilson 14th, Chris Chatfield 15th, David Kupok in 16th, with Bence Valdinger in 17th, then it is Joantas Martins in 18th, Andre Vaderi in 19th, Kirishima De Rosa down in 20th, with Felix Sontag in 21st, and Jamie Griffiths in 22nd and last. Once again, the 2 Williams drivers occupying the last 2 positions as Wilson goes off the track. Can she keep it out of the wall? She's gone straight on, and she has got it in the wall, but thankfully she does not crash into the wall there, and thankfully she didn't rejoin dangerously there, but that looked like a bit of aquaplaning there, Franco.
Yeah, track situation looks actually a bit tricky so far. Yeah, very lucky to not have collided into the wall. So good save from her.
Yeah, and very lucky that her session didn't end there. Of course, she would have got the spare car ban, unlike Michael Mocho and Jamie Griffiths, if she ended up crashing, because that's not a glitch. That is an actual mistake there, rather than what Mocho and Griffiths had, which was a glitch coming out of turn 2 there. So I thought I would have mentioned that, but thankfully she saved it, and luckily a session did not come to an end quite early, and luckily Alfa Romeo don't need to get a repair bill on that car for qualifying. So it's pretty much that, as Wilson will be completing that lap, riding aboard with Felix Sontag, and it's safe to say that so far throughout this season, even though Williams have probably got the worst car on the grid, I think it's safe to say that Sontag has had the measure of Griffiths so far this season, and a lot of people are saying has Griffiths started to lose his form a little bit, unlike what we've seen in the past couple of seasons that he's been in the top class.
Probably Griffiths is suffering from the fact that the car is driving is very slow, and as we mentioned a lot of times, it's probably the slowest. And let's say Sontag is more used to this type of situation and can actually deliver results in difficult situations like this. You know, like in 2017, he drove for Sauber, who had a older engine compared to all the other cars. Or in general, the last 5 seasons, Williams hasn't actually delivered a midfield car, more of a back marker, and Sontag has always delivered good performances overall in general. So let's say Griffiths is probably more suffering from the fact that the car is much slower than he probably thought. And yeah, maybe even the new engine is what he's suffering. But you have to improve this because it's not going to be safe driving like he did last 2 races.
Yeah, indeed, and obviously in a series like this, the series does not wait about for you. You've got to really impress, really. It's the same, really, in real life, and Griffiths will be hoping he can turn that around from this round onwards, of course. Obviously, plenty of time to improve, of course. Like with every driver who's probably had a terrible start to the season, there's still plenty of time to make amends, really. As we're currently looking at Miklos Gau at the moment, who, of course, came off the back of that very big crash that Franco alluded to a little bit earlier on in China, but thankfully, of course, we don't have an injury system in this after the chaos that happened in Belgium last season when it came to driver errors, which scrapped that rule entirely because of how ridiculous it would have been if we'd kept hold of that injury system. But yeah, that's that really. But yeah, it was a big accident really for Miklos Gau. But I think when you look back at the replay, you'd say, because it was Joseph Willows that he collided with at that corner, you could probably say, Franco, that maybe it was pretty much on Gau really, because Joseph did have the right to go into that corner.
I mean, I don't think Willows has any fault. I mean, zero fault. Gau probably, yeah, turned a little bit earlier and went into Willow's right wheel, and yeah, some more of a racing incident in my opinion. If I have to say, maybe a 60% of fault is onto Gau, and yeah, the rest is just a lucky circumstances, because in my opinion Willows haven't done anything wrong.
And obviously Gau will want to put that race behind him, and of course try and bounce back here in Korea, like most drivers, of course, who were involved in accidents last time out in China, or in the case of Willows, a mechanical failure. So anyway, as Felix Sontag now, then we're looking at in the Williams in 21st position, 3 tenths off of Kirishima De Rosa, who again seems to be struggling. I know the conditions have changed, but of course that was done in the dry conditions, and it once again just seems to be a case that De Rosa just seemingly struggling a little bit with that McLaren at the moment, and could that be a thing to keep an eye on when we get to qualifying a little bit later on? So yeah, that could be something to as mentioned, to keep an eye on there. As we now look at Felix Sontag in the Williams, as he just makes his way around the final few turns. Just under 4 minutes to go now in this practice session, as Ionescu is actually coming back into the pits this lap, and I would imagine that will be his session done with. And he's had a pretty decent session. He's got some running both in the dry and the wet. Of course, he obviously took part in the Formula E race yesterday at Mexico City. Obviously, he managed to get a flight over to Korea just in order to do this free practice session, and he's kind of lucky he's in Formula E, because if he was a Formula 2 driver, that would be a little bit of a problem given the contingency rule that we have between the top class and F2. So yeah, it would have been a little bit of an issue there. But anyways, a lock up there for, well, I say a lock up, a bit of an aquaplane moment there for Chris Chatfield, the man, of course, who won here last season. He took his first ever victory in the top class here last season, but as we mentioned a little bit earlier on, it's probably unlikely that Ferrari, unless something dramatic happens in the race, it's probably unlikely that Ferrari are going to repeat that here in Korea, because it does seem that the car is not as good as what it was in the second half of last season, where they were oddly enough were pretty much outsiders to win the Constructors' Championship going into the finale at Brazil last season, despite the fact that neither of their drivers were in contention for the Drivers' Championship. But obviously in the end that didn't happen. The team ended up finishing third in the Constructors, hence why the team has the third garage, really, well, the fifth and sixth garage in the pit lane, really, and the third along with the teams, because of course Yuri does it now where like in real life the garage order is based on the constructors order. As whoa, Ionescu got a little bit too close to the back there of Kirishima De Rosa going into the pits, but as I said, I think that will be session done with, as I think we're now going to ride on board. No, we're not. It seemed that was an auto cam there. I thought for a minute we were going to ride on board with the drivers for the remainder of the session, really, because we have just over 2 minutes to go. Sontag will be coming back into the pits. as the Ferrari will be going around the outside there. But, well, in fact, he thinks better of it, probably because Chris has been given a notification that Felix is actually coming back into the pits, really. But he's been slightly held up as a result, and now it looks like the Renault is going to try and overtake him into the first corner there. And that Renault does so indeed. So we ride on board with Benz Valdinger, and I think we are now riding on board with the drivers for the remainder of the session. Lopez going back into the pits, so that's his session done with. Let's see what lap time that Miklos Gal is able to achieve in the Alpha Tauri as he just makes his way around the final few corners on the racetrack now. Then a very interesting sequence of final few turns, it's safe to say, and a pit lane entrance that in real life the drivers branded as very dangerous. But apart from one instance that we had in 2020 where a driver was on the inside while someone was coming into the pits, it's been relatively okay. And interestingly enough, Robert Ionescu's car has been fitted with the extreme wets along with a couple of others, but I think it's a little bit too late now to see some extreme wet tyre running in this session. Well, it will be too late because, well, Kloss, in fact, never mind. Kloss is actually on the extreme wet tyre, and he'll get one flying lap in before the session comes to a close. Although I do think that his lap might get interfered in a little bit by Amelia Wilson, and a lot of people probably thinking, has Wilson regretted moving to Alfa Romeo given how well her previous team Haas are doing this season? Obviously, that's obviously a very interesting question. As Willows crosses the line there on the normal wets, I believe he was there. Oh, Chung, across the line she goes. What sort of lap time is she able to do in these wet conditions? She does a 1 minute 46.229. Griffiths is going back into the pits, and he's actually on extreme wet, so we did actually get some extreme wet running during this session. So I do apologise for that. Roman Quarg currently in 11th place and will stay in 11th because the conditions are not improving at this session. Roman Quarg now then comes across the line, and the Frenchman does a 146.4. Valdinger, I wonder if he's on the harder compound of the normal wets, is a 148.607 for the Hungarian. Martins across the line, 1 minute 50.567 for him. 3, 2, 1 and 0. Checkered flag is out. That is the end of the session, and I do believe that Martins was the last driver to cross the line, so he'll be the last one to cross the line on this occasion to conclude this practice session, which unfortunately has not been that great given that the lap times came earlier on in the session, and thanks to the wet conditions, it's obviously we haven't seen any more improvement since then. Mocho crossed the line and does a 1, I think that's at a 146 there, I think it said. As now we look at Rahul Patel now then in the Lamborghini. Let's see what lap time he can produce as he's now going to cross the line, and he crosses the line to do a 144.7. I think it actually was a 144 that Mocho did, in fact, and I was thinking that maybe the 144 was a little bit too much for clearing up. Now here's Kloss on the extreme wets, and you can definitely tell he's going to be a lot slower than the drivers on the normal wets, but let's see what sort of lap time he can produce anyway on these extreme wet tyres. It's a 148.410, 148.5 for Wilson. I don't know if she got held up there by Barcisz Kloss, but still a decent time there from the Polish driver. Joseph Willows, across the line he will go in the McLaren, let's see, and it's a 146.5. Here comes, well, those two haven't been able to do a lap in time, they're just getting some mileage. Laura Chung around the final couple of corners, as she will now come across the line in the Lamborghini, and it's a 148.470. As here comes Roman Quarg in the Renault now then, just making his way around the final few turns on at the racetrack now then, and around the final couple of corners now then we will go, and now making his way onto the pit straight. And what lap time is the Renault driver going to produce? A 149.455. Ionescu getting some mileage there, 149.8 for Valdinger, 149 for him. Here's Martins, the last one to cross the line, and he does a 1 minute 51.6. And that's the session done with Burn top, Carr in second, and Lopez in third. But really, Franco, not really much conclusions given the changeable conditions.
Yeah, actually, rain came very early that it's impossible to judge the real values of the cars so far this week. But it's fair to say that it seems to be maybe another Red Bull versus Mercedes for pole position on pure pace.
Yep, indeed. Well, that is it for the practice session. We're just going to take a brief pause for the moment, and we'll come back with a fresh stream for the qualifying session. But for the meantime, I've been JW97, he's been Franco Gamba, and we'll see you in just a little bit for the qualifying session. See you in a bit.